I was 21 when my mother told me I'd shamed the family. She said it calmly, the way she used to discuss the weather, like my queerness was a passing storm that had just ruined the garden party. My father stood beside her, silent, his hands clasped behind his back like a statue carved from pride and denial. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. In our house, disappointment was quieter than anger, but far more lethal. "You understand," my mother said, smoothing her pearl necklace, "that this is not about love. It's about legacy. That word was our family's gospel. The Barlows had ruled the hills of North Carolina for generations. Cotton first, then railroads, then real estate. Every building in town seemed to bear our name in one form or another. Barlow Hardware. Barlow Baptist. Even the hospital wing was Barlow Memorial. We weren't royalty, but we pretended we were. And like royalty, we were obsessed with image. So when their daughter, the only daughter, came out, they handled it the way Barlows handled everything inconvenient. With silence, paperwork, and polite exile. Within a week, I was gone. They cut me out of the will. My name vanished from family documents. My photographs disappeared from the mansion's walls. I was a ghost they had buried while still breathing. For years, I told myself I didn't care. I built a life elsewhere. Small apartment, cheap coffee, honest work. No pearls, no servants, no portraits in gilded frames. Just the clean, uncluttered truth of being free. Still, sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night hearing my mother's voice echo in my head. It's not about love. It's about legacy. 10 years later, a newspaper headline brought me home. Barlow patriarch announces retirement. Family to celebrate with gala at Oak Ridge Estate. A photograph accompanied it. My father, still upright and immaculate. My brothers standing beside him like heirs carved from marble. The caption below read, "The Barlow family, symbols of faith, tradition, and Southern virtue." I laughed out loud when I read it. Faith, tradition, virtue. If only they knew what those words looked like behind closed doors. I booked my flight that night. Not for reconciliation. Not for money, but because legacy, as my mother once told me, is everything. And I was finally ready to rewrite ours. The drive to Oak Ridge was longer than I remembered. Not in distance, but in time. The road wound through fields of dying cotton and past the same Baptist billboards that had once policed our morality. The air was thick with humidity and memory. When the estate finally came into view, I almost didn't recognize it. The white pillars gleamed under the Carolina sun, pristine and ghostly. The house had been repainted, the gardens trimmed, the same magnolia trees still standing like silent witnesses. Only I had changed. At the gate, the guard blinked at my name when I gave it. "Barlow?" he repeated, uncertain. I smiled. "That's right. Tell my father his daughter's come home." He hesitated before pressing the button to open the gates. The iron swung wide with a groan, the sound of history reluctantly letting me in. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and nostalgia. The foyer's marble floor reflected the chandelier's light just as it always had, but where portraits of family used to hang in a perfect line, I noticed one space left intentionally blank, a gap between generations. Mine. The omission was louder than any insult. My mother found me first. She looked exactly the same, as if she'd been preserved in ice, hair coiled neatly, pearls gleaming, expression composed into permanent civility. "Charlotte," she said. My name sounded foreign on her tongue. I nodded. "Mother." She looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans, my cropped hair, the small silver ring in my ear. "You look different." "I am," I said simply. We stood there in silence until she stepped aside. "Your father is in his study. He'll see you before dinner." The study hadn't changed either. Same dark oak panels, same smell of cigars and old pride. My father sat behind the desk that had once terrified me as a child. He didn't stand when I entered. He just looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "You've come back," he said. "Just for the gala. To stir trouble?" To celebrate your retirement, I said, matching his tone. A faint smile tugged at his lips. You always did have your mother's wit. And your stubbornness, I replied. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. You forfeited your place here long ago. What could possibly bring you back now? I let the silence hang, then said quietly, curiosity, legacy, maybe closure. He nodded once. Closure is expensive. So is denial. At dinner, the table gleamed with gold-trimmed china and perfectly folded linen. My brothers, Samuel and Luke, sat flanking my father like lieutenants guarding a throne. Their wives smiled too brightly. Their children, future heirs of an empire built on other people's labor, played near the grand piano. No one mentioned the 10 years of absence. No one said my name above a whisper. It was as if I'd been resurrected but not forgiven. We're so glad you're here, Samuel said with rehearsed warmth. Father wanted all of us together for this celebration. How generous, I said. Family unity makes for such good headlines. Luke chuckled nervously. My mother's fork paused midair. My father said nothing. After dinner, I wandered the halls alone. Every portrait told the same story. Men in suits, women in pearls, the Barlow dynasty frozen in oil paint and pretense. I stopped before the oldest one, my great-grandfather, the first to turn old money into moral authority. His plaque read, Founder of the Barlow Foundation, for God, family and future, I whispered under my breath, and for control. That night I sat in my childhood room, unpacking the small leather satchel I'd brought. Inside were notes, copies of tax records, and a single flash drive. 10 years of research. 10 years of watching from the outside while my family sold their virtue to the highest bidder. The foundation they built for God and family? It was laundering money through shell charities, their Christian housing initiative, exploitative contracts that displaced hundreds. They preached morality from the pulpit and built their empire on quiet corruption. And in 3 days, at the gala, during my father's retirement speech, I would tell the world exactly who the Barlows really were. The night of the gala smelled like money and magnolias. Limousines lined the circular drive, pearls and tuxedos spilling out like sequins. The press had gathered near the main doors, cameras flashing in the humid evening. A banner stretched above the veranda. Honoring Thomas Barlow, a legacy of faith and leadership. I almost laughed at the word legacy. It had been haunting me since the day they disowned me. Inside, the ballroom glowed gold. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the marble floor, and a jazz band played in the corner, polite enough not to drown out the polite conversations. The scent of champagne mixed with lilies, my mother's favorite, my least. I kept to the edges, glass in hand, invisible but observing. Years away had made me fluent in silence. I could listen, collect, and remember. Such a remarkable man, your father, one woman whispered to another. Built everything from virtue and vision. And faith, the other added. Faith. Always faith. I could almost feel my mother's hand squeezing my shoulder, the silent warning she used to give when I strayed too close to honesty. When the speeches began, the crowd gathered near the stage. My father stood behind a mahogany podium, posture flawless, smile benevolent, the Southern patriarch in his final act. Friends, he began, tonight isn't about me. It's about family, about heritage, and about the future we build together. Applause. The Barlow Foundation will continue its work. In education, in faith, in community. My sons will carry that torch. More applause. Cameras flashed. My brother stood beside him, all polished confidence and borrowed dignity. Then, unexpectedly, his eyes found me in the crowd. And my daughter, he said. Charlotte has come home. We welcome her with love. The lie was smooth as silk. A perfect bow on a rotten gift. The crowd turned to look at me. Their smiles were curious, cautious, waiting for my reaction. I smiled back. Thank you, Father, I said loudly enough for the microphones to catch. That's very generous, especially considering the years I didn't exist. A ripple of unease moved through the room. The band faltered for half a beat before resuming. My mother's face stiffened. My father's jaw clenched. "Perhaps," he said evenly, "you'd like to say a few words." Exactly what I'd hoped he'd say. I stepped onto the stage, the air heavy with perfume and pretense. My heart beat steady, the calm that comes not before battle, but before justice. "Thank you," I began. "It's been a long time since I stood in this house. A long time since I was a Barlow in name only." I looked around the crowd, politicians, donors, pastors, all the people who'd helped build the myth of our moral empire. My father spoke about legacy tonight, about faith and family. I want to honor that by telling the truth. The murmurs began immediately. My mother whispered something to my father. He didn't move. When I left this family, it was because I loved honestly. That honesty cost me my inheritance, my name, my home, but that was the cleanest punishment this family ever handed out. I paused, letting the silence stretch, because behind every speech about virtue, behind every check signed in the name of charity, there's a debt. And the people who paid it aren't standing here tonight. They're the workers cheated through shell companies, the families evicted by Christian housing, the women silenced for asking where the money went. The screen behind me flickered. Images appeared, copies of documents, bank transfers, the faces of families whose homes the foundation had taken, all neatly compiled on that flash drive I'd carried for a decade. Gasps rippled through the room. A camera flash, then another. The crowd shifted, confusion turning to horror. "This," I said softly, "is the real Barlow legacy." My father's voice cut through the noise. "Enough!" He moved toward me, but I didn't flinch. "You wanted closure," I said. "So here it is. The truth is free. But the reckoning? That's expensive." He stopped, trembling. Fury, fear, or both. My mother's eyes glistened, not with tears but with disbelief. The band had gone silent. Reporters whispered furiously, their pens moving faster than his empire could crumble. "You'll regret this," he said. "No," I replied. "I regret waiting this long." I turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the party. It's your last one under the Barlow name." Outside, the night air felt lighter, humid, alive, electric. From inside, I could hear the commotion building, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, my family's legend collapsing under the weight of truth. I didn't look back. The magnolias swayed in the wind, and for the first time in years, the scent didn't suffocate me. By morning, the news had spread. The Carolina Herald headline read, "Barlow Foundation under investigation. Financial misconduct allegations surface after gala." Below it, a photograph of my father on stage, his face frozen mid-reaction, eyes wide, mouth half open. The first uncomposed picture of him I'd ever seen. The article credited whistleblower documents leaked during retirement celebration. They didn't mention my name. They didn't have to. The estate's gates were closed by noon. Reporters gathered like vultures, shouting questions that would never be answered. My mother stopped taking calls. My brothers issued a statement about misunderstandings and paperwork discrepancies, but I'd made sure the paperwork was immaculate. The trail of fraud and hypocrisy was too clean to deny, too public to bury. The empire that had erased me was collapsing under its own illusion of perfection. I stayed one more night in Oak Ridge. In my childhood room, the silence was thick but no longer cruel. I walked through the halls, through what used to be a museum of power, and found it stripped of meaning. The portraits of my ancestors still hung there, their painted eyes watching, but I no longer felt judged. Just observed. For the first time, I pitied them, these people who'd mistaken control for faith, wealth for worth. I found my father in the study just before dawn. He was sitting at the same desk, papers scattered around him, a tumbler of bourbon untouched. "You came to watch it fall," he said without looking up. "No," I said softly. "I came to let it fall." He exhaled slowly, his voice brittle. "You've destroyed everything we built." "No, Father. You destroyed it. I just stopped pretending it was holy." He finally met my eyes. For a moment, I saw something raw beneath the arrogance. Not remorse, not love, but recognition. "You always were too much like me," he whispered. That's the one thing I worked hardest to change. I turned to leave. Behind me, his breath shuddered, the sound of a monument cracking from within. Outside, the magnolia trees stood heavy with blossoms. The air was still. I sat on the stone steps of the veranda and watched the sunrise wash over the fields. When I was younger, my mother used to say that the Barlow estate looked most beautiful at dawn, like God himself was blessing it. Now, in the soft light, it looked different. Not blessed, but ordinary. Just another house built on old money and old lies, and for the first time, that ordinariness felt like peace. I didn't stay for the investigations, or the hearings, or the inevitable auction of family assets. I didn't need to. I left Oak Ridge with a single suitcase and a notebook filled with new plans. Small, honest, sustainable things. Projects for local shelters, art programs for kids, real legacy, not the ornamental kind. The money wasn't mine, but the story was. And stories, when told truthfully, can build more than fortunes ever could. A few months later, I received a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's, elegant and measured. It said only 3 words. You were right. No apology. No explanation. Just that. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my notebook. Proof that even in that house of mirrors, truth had managed to slip through a crack. Now when people ask about my family, I tell them I come from a long line of storytellers. Only some of us ever learned how to tell the truth. And when they ask what I inherited, I smile and say, freedom, and a name I had to rebuild myself. As the sun sets each evening, I sometimes think of Oak Ridge, the fading paint, the silence of the empty halls, the magnolia trees still standing. Let them keep their ghosts. I have my own kind of legacy now. Not built on lies, but on light. Not inherited, but chosen.